Hello and welcome to our webinar on recognition in partnership with Achievers. I'm Jenny Roper, editor of HR magazine. We're here today to discuss recognition for recognition, why it's important and how to get it right. According to OGO research, 82% of employees don't feel that their supervisors recognise them enough for their contributions. And yet 40% said they'd put more energy into their work if they were recognised more often, which offers tantalising insight into how much more motivated, engaged and ultimately productive employees could be if organisations were getting this right. To discuss whether recognition should be taken more seriously and strategically within HR and to offer tips based on their experience on how to tackle recognition really effectively, we have our panel, who I'll introduce in just a second. But just before I do, I'd like to encourage you, our viewers, to send in your questions using the box at the bottom of your screens. We'll put these questions to our panel in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. So, our panel. First, we have Denise Willett, Senior Director EMEA at Achievers. Denise helps clients build and maintain successful employee engagement programmes that align with strategic business objectives and is passionate about the power of a work environment committed to employee recognition and engagement. Next, we have Claire Kearney, Head of People Engagement at Everton Football Club. Claire has over 20 years reward and recognition experience, gained working with businesses across multiple sectors. She first came across Everton during her time at PwC, but now works at the club full-time, helping to build the strategy that won the reward and recognition category at this year's HR Excellence Awards. Last but not least, we have Chadi Musa, former Director of HR and Talent at fruit and vegetable wholesaler We More and client partner at Let's Talk Talent. Chadi has over 12 years' experience delivering change in large, complex international organisations, with former roles including Global Talent and Performance Manager at Intercontinental Hotels Group and Global Head of People Development at BSI. So that's our panel. I'd like, as always, to kick off our debate by launching a poll question for you, our viewers, to take part in. We'll be running a few more questions throughout the debate, so please do log your thoughts on each. So, for our first question, I'd like to get a sense of how much of a strategy around recognition most organisations and HR departments currently have in place. So here we go. Question 1. How extensive and sophisticated is the recognition strategy at your organisation currently? So we've got very, somewhat, not very, or it's non-existent. Okay, so while you, our viewers, log your thoughts on that, I'm going to start with you, Denise, if that's okay. Putting the same question to you really in terms of when you're out there talking to various organisations, what sort of a picture are you getting in terms of how far along the journey on recognition most organisations are? What's your sense of that? How sophisticated are people's strategies at the moment?
Yeah, so as I think about the conversations that I've been having over the last number of years, we're seeing a big shift in how people are working. So mobile workforce and WeWork, my team and I spend quite a bit of time at a WeWork. You've got flattening organizations, customers of ours creating smart teams. So work is just getting done differently. And the people strategy has been put at the forefront of that. So this is not a new conversation. Employees and employee engagement at the board table is a very common conversation. And recognition being a piece of that. Recognition is the simplest and the top trigger of employee engagement. There are many things we can do, but recognition being kind of that low-hanging fruit. And I think, as we think about the importance of engagement, all you have to do is go on your LinkedIn, you see Richard Branson's face and the quotes about happy employees equal happy customers equals shareholder value. So if we could use recognition to tackle employee engagement, and that's the easiest way to do it, I think that's great. And this is becoming more and more part of the conversation. So I don't think that recognition is new or the importance of recognition is new. I think it's the how we're approaching recognition that's changing. And it's changing in a couple of ways. One being around moving away from that culture of heroes or a few elite people getting recognized once or twice a year, and it's moving towards frequent and daily impact by recognizing the great things that are happening every single day. And then the second way that recognition is changing is really around moving away from everything having to be tied to big rewards, and the meaning being in the recognition itself. So really, employees just being seen, being heard, being recognized for their efforts. We have a saying at Achievers, it's what gets recognized gets repeated.
Nice. That's given us a really amazing intro to the topic. Really nice. Claire, I wondered if you could talk us through the journey that Everton has been on as our kind of HR Excellence Awards winner in this category.
So
What's it been
traditionally, football clubs have been quite family orientated in their structure. And I first came across Everton, about 3 years ago. And they were transitioning from that family structure to becoming more corporate. And to sustain that growth, we needed to implement a pay and grade structure. And that was very much the start of the journey. But alongside that, we've strategically looked at recognition. And fundamentally, at the heart of that strategy are some guiding principles. And those guiding principles are helping us to shape the strategy that fits with our culture. So, for example, our CEO, Denise Barrett-Baxendale, she will start every message with a thank you. So it's reinforcing, a bit like you were saying, Denise, it's that reinforcement. But critically, it's about being authentic as well. So for me, when we're looking at recognition at Everton, that's the key thing that we want it to be. We want it to be frequent, but we want it to be authentic. But it can be simple. So the power of a simple thank you shouldn't be underestimated. But we also have that supplemented by the annual recognition awards. So our motto is Nil Satis Nisi Optimum, and we've linked our annual staff awards to that motto, and we also link them to our values. So we've got 4 values that we will get people to, demonstrate, and then we recognised how they've demonstrated it. So it's very much about how people go about their jobs as opposed to what they're delivering, which is equally important. And, it touches on elements of our recruitment policy. So we very much encourage recruitment based on the person. And then we will train and upskill. So get the right person for the People's Club, and that's, we're halfway there.
Do you mean the right person in terms of someone who's going to be very good at being embedded in that kind of culture and promoting it and helping to contribute?
Absolutely. So one of our values, for example, is family. So it's very much still, whilst we're growing and becoming, more corporate, is how do we keep that sense of belonging and actually seeing the person behind the job. And I think it's very important for me that, sometimes we get those Sunday night blues because we're leaving a little bit of ourselves behind when we go to work. And it's how do we recognise the individual behind that role. Unfortunately, I work for Kim Healy, who is quite an inspiring people director. She's extremely creative, and her vision has been very much about, bringing people to life and personalising recognition. And that's demonstrated very well through our Make-A-Wish campaign, which was everybody in Everton could submit a wish. There was no boundaries around that, and it was complete trust that the wish that we'd make would, be sensible. But what it ended up being was a very clever and unique way to get to know people, but also very inspiring, and actually got to know the person, and that was what was recognised.
Something Denise said really interested me, and I wondered if I could grab your thoughts, and actually maybe Chardy's as well, before we go to our first poll question results. You said recognition is potentially the low-hanging fruit of engagement, and sort of almost the easiest way, maybe even a bit of a building block to building really strong engagement. Would you agree with that, Claire? Does that chime with you?
I think it should be at the heart of the strategy as well. I agree that people should be able to feel it there should be a brand around it, there should be an identity. But I think if you've got those guiding principles of, what is it that we want from recognition? Is it that we're reinforcing a type of person? Is it that we want to recognise the output of somebody? So I think if you think about that and then also link it to where the business wants to go as well, for us, the first team performance is at the very heart of what we do. So it's important that that is recognised, but then also recognising the team behind the team as well.
Yeah, so work out what you're actually trying to achieve with the recognition and the kind of behaviours you want to reinforce. Charlie, sorry, before we go on to our poll question results, how do you feel about recognition and its link to engagement? And actually, even bigger than that, do we need to, again, recognition for recognition, do we need to recognise it as more strategic than a lot of people do at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is more strategic. And if you look at any engagement model, it predicts business outcomes. You've got to take it seriously. People staying within an organisation, being committed, loyal, working hard, and there's an aspect of that which is driven by recognition. So why would you not do it? There's a clear business case and mandate for it. I think what's been really, really interesting to hear from these talented individuals is there are some clear themes which are supported by evidence as well. Recognising individual differences, personalising your recognition strategy. But also creating a culture whereby it happens regularly, because that emotional connection that comes from a recognition doesn't come from reward. You might be rewarded for something financially or materially. It's not going to leave the same mark on an individual. So how do you do that? Well, you do it by making sure that managers, peers, can recognise someone consistently, and it kind of works in the terms of reciprocity. If you're recognised, you're then more likely to recognise others. And that's what you want, and it's free, and it helps the business. So why would you not do it?
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to come on to quite a few of those themes that we've. So that was a brilliant starter for 10. Thank you so much, guys, in terms of creating cultures of recognition and how you do that best, and actually the reward and recognition link and how that should work. Let's go to our poll results, because I can see they're ready for us on our screen, and grab a bit of reaction from you guys. So we've got the largest majority of people sitting in the not very camp, and then a little bit more positively, the second biggest majority of people in the somewhat camp, although we do have quite a few. So what's that, kind of 16%? It's non-existent. Charlie, coming back to you, does that chime with what you've seen in various businesses you've worked at over the years? Do you think people are kind of lagging a little bit on recognition and getting it right?
Well, really interestingly, so I think I heard that in the US, billions, I think it's 27 billion US companies spend on this area. But yet the Gallup poll will tell you that about 60-65% of employees don't feel recognised.
Yeah.
So something is, the investment is there, but is the return on investment there? I'm not so sure. I think the areas that we've raised today probably give you some of the clues to those answers. The way we work is changing. Work is now something you do, not somewhere you go. The way people work, there's 5 generations in the workforce. We should never bucket people, but these people all have different expectations. So a sophisticated reward strategy is a personal reward strategy, is giving individuals the opportunities to dial into rewards and recognition that is relevant to them. So I think the challenge for organisations is, how do you personalise or become so agile that your reward strategy has something for everyone?
Is that the issue being shown by those figures, do you think? Do you think people have probably got something in place recognition-wise, but they're maybe not tailoring it, personalising it enough to the different
absolutely,
demographics?
because you think, it's I guess it's about, we're in a period now where what people expect, the psychological contract is changing. Typically what organisations are doing, saying actually this is we think we know what employees want, or actually employees feel differently about that. So let's take one example. It's not recognition, but it is about per se, it's recognising that people want to work in different ways. They want portfolio careers. They want to have other interests. Flexible working. I'm not sure that companies are necessarily moving at the pace that employees expect.
On all fronts, not just recognition.
Absolutely, not just recognition. Therefore, there's going to be a mismatch between the investment that companies are making, and what people, and what people are receiving.
Fantastic.
From my perspective, that and you alluded to, it really comes down to competent management. So I think as a HR function, we can design recognition programs, but for them to be successful requires, I believe, just competent management. So line managers who get it, who live it, who breathe it, and it just becomes a very natural and organic way. So that I think sometimes you can think, oh, we need this big recognition scheme, but I think, as I sort of mentioned before, if you know your people and you're a good skilled manager, then I think recognition is one of the most simplest things that you could actually do. It doesn't have to cost you anything. And a lot of the time it is just how knowing your people and getting it right as to what they need.
That brings us really nicely, actually, onto our second poll question, and we'll actually come back to that topic as well in our third poll question of focusing around how skilled managers and leaders are at recognition at the moment. But our second poll question of the day is going to very much look at the how of embedding a culture of recognition. So some of the technology and tools maybe that people are using, and maybe we'll actually go back to this idea of maybe they're not as important, but we're going to discuss that in a minute as a panel anyway. So here we go, question 2 for you guys to log your thoughts on wherever you're viewing from. So what recognition offerings do you currently have in place at your organisation? And tick all that apply. This is multiple choice. So we've got staff awards, staff suggestion schemes, celebration of career milestones, peer-to-peer recognition, an online recognition platform, a mobile-ready online recognition platform, recognition linked to bonuses and financial rewards, going back to what we were saying earlier, recognition linked to non-financial perks, training for managers to create cultures of recognition on a more informal, ongoing basis, which again comes back to what we were just saying. So, Denise, I'd like to bring you back into the debate, if that's okay, and talk to me about what you think a really powerful combination is in terms of having training in place for managers, potentially creating a culture, but maybe some very specific schemes or tools or bits and bobs that people might pull together to create a really comprehensive, effective recognition strategy.
Leaders and from executive to frontline are one of our pillars of best practice when implementing a recognition program. So when we train around that, we don't train in a way that you might think it's not click here, do that. It's all around the why and the what's in it for me. So we talk a lot to managers about how they can leverage recognition to create high-performing teams, linked to the behaviors that they're looking to drive, the mission, the vision, the values that you mentioned, Claire. And we're constantly having that conversation with leaders and helping them understand how they can make the biggest impact and why that matters. So key element is that leadership engagement.
Yeah, fantastic. Can that be backed up quite usefully by technology? I think one of the options was sort of mobile-ready online recognition platforms that people can use when I'm thinking of remote workforce, which probably you've got a bit of experience of, haven't you, Charlie, in terms of people who aren't sat in front of computers day to day at your former company, Wealmore.
So it's a really interesting one. I think technology is brilliant because the thing about recognition is it needs to be a few things. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be timely. It needs to be consistent. So if technology enables that, that's fantastic. And who doesn't use it? So I think for me it plays a key part. And I think as has been alluded to earlier, the people that you really want recognition from are your managers and your peers. So to enable that to happen, technology can play a key role. But it's also the benefits that then gives, because if it helps teams cross-functionally, you might not be in the same office, you might not be able to have that chat at the water cooler or in the canteen. So it can provide really useful. But also it's that emotional connection, because you might log into a recognition system and you might see something that someone has said to you, and I guess it carries that emotional moment forward. So people will then be reminded constantly that they were recognised for something good, and then they'll feel good about it, because ultimately people who stay in organisations and do well feel good about the organisation.
So it's making it a little bit more formal and a bit more public than you saying to someone just face to face, oh well done, good job kind of thing. It's putting it on the record, as it were.
I mean, you get the transparency and the breaking down of silos in a world where people aren't always together anymore, which is very hard to do.
I think we have to balance that with, typically it always seems to be the extroverts within business that get the recognition, and it's the same people, and it's how do we balance that with, you know, trying to really see the person, and, you know, if somebody's a quieter person, you know, how can we do that? With technology is really important, but it has to be balanced with other ways that, you know, people might not want that visibility, might
That's
not
a really
like
good point.
it.
Yeah.
So again, it's just all comes back to knowing the person and trusting your workforce. And I think, you know, that's more important than recognition, is personally trust.
Absolutely, and that actually brings up a really key theme, which is equity and consistency. So we spoke about, you know, the benefits of recognition. Are we setting up employees and managers to have the skills to be able to give that recognition in the right way, and are they doing it consistently? Because actually, if you're just going to recognise those who shout the loudest, you know, people will feel that's unfair. So creating an environment or an ecosystem where people feel actually, if I do a good job, I will be recognised fairly and equally.
And it's going to be an objective
absolutely,
recognition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I guess this brings us into the knotty, tricky territory of unconscious bias and you know, the favouritism that could potentially. We talk about bias and unconscious bias most at the moment in terms of recruitment decisions, I think, don't we? But it strikes me that it's as pertinent here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you want to comment on that, Denise?
The most successful recognition programs that we see are led by organizations that embed recognition across all areas of the business. So it's not just about coming in and getting recognized for doing a great in your role, but an engaged employee, as you say, it's different for each employee. So one employee might feel most engaged when they're doing great in their role and they're working a charity drive and they're participating in a step challenge and completing a certification. And so if you can leverage recognition across all areas of the business, that's when you'll really get the most, because employees will have various ways to be recognized for all of the behaviors that we're looking to drive.
Claire, are you nodding along at the unconscious bias?
I think definitely. So I think for us, I mean, again, it's not strictly recognition, but we've launched quite a significant campaign regarding equality and diversity and inclusion under the Altogether brand. But what that has allowed us to do is to recognise, as you say, you know, how you link that to behaviours, and, you know, for the people that have a real passion, you know, we have now internal networks, the Women's Network, various others, where people can really get involved outside of their day job, have the connection with others. So, yeah, it's really powerful.
Fantastic. Let's go to our results, if that's all right,
Sure.
Denise, and then I will bring you right back in, and maybe you want to comment first of all. So a nice mix, that's what you'd expect to see on a kind of multiple choice of this nature. So I think, it seems fairly evenly split there, with staff awards ranking quite highly, staff suggestion schemes. Fantastic. I wanted to come back to talking about this idea of linking financial reward with recognition, and whether that's helpful in some circumstances and less helpful in others, because you touched on that earlier, Charlie. Do you want to start us off on that, and then others can jump in? I sense it's going to be an emotive
It could be.
topic.
It might very well be what it usually is for people. So here's the thinking, and I think here's some of the research on that. If we have an agreement that says you do this successfully and I will pay you, that's fine. That is reward, and it's expected. It's like a bonus.
Yeah.
You know, if you get it, it's expected. If you don't get it, you'll be annoyed. If you get a bit more, you might be pleasantly surprised for a bit. However, it's more of a hygiene factor. It's not going to create that emotional connection. And this is where we need to be really, really careful. So, for example, it's absolutely right to give someone a reward if they're not expecting it. It's genuinely a surprise, and you can be clear about, you know, why you're giving that person a reward. So let's take an example. You know, we all do really well in this panel, and you at the end hand us a gift card and say goodbye.
This is awkward.
Well, I mean, managing expectations. But on the other hand, think about it this way: it would be more impactful if you actually took us all out to dinner and then talked about how well we did. And you can, well, maybe potentially, but you get the point. And it's about that connection. So the good thing about some of these schemes is that it should, you know, you should be giving managers and peers the power, so they can say, actually, do you know what? It's not about having a centrally, a central team of people who dictate that our reward pot is going to make sure that this percentage of the employee base are rewarded. No, it's about saying to people, do you know what? If you think someone's done a great job and they've demonstrated our values, or they've done something which is in keeping with behaviours we expect, then you're empowering them to recognise that person, and that can be that can be amazing. I think, as we've said earlier, it should be personalised to the organisation.
So you've got to empower managers really, and that's a really good point. When you start putting financial or material rewards behind a recognition scheme, that's potentially where you really need to empower people, because otherwise I would imagine it becomes a very bureaucratic process of who's allowed to access that treat fund and in what circumstances. Claire, how do you do that? Does it have to be trusting managers and trusting people's discretion?
I think ultimately, but you have to also help them along to get them to a position where they feel comfortable to do that. So with regard to Everton, we are sort of progressing and evolving as opposed to revolutionary change. And part of that is to empower managers, to give them the trust, but also to equip them with the capability to do that. And some can and some can't, like any business. And ultimately we want to get to a point where managers will own that pot of money. They will be absolutely in control of who they want to give it to. And I think there's always going to be need for some sort of high-level calibration behind the scenes, just to sort of keep just.
So that's very much driven by HR.
I think so.
Monitoring what's going on. Again, coming back to the consistency and fairness. And
absolutely. But I think ultimately, it is about that empowerment. And like I say, ultimately, if you're trusted, it's so powerful. So absolutely.
Let's launch our third and final poll question, then I'm going to come back to you, Denise, I promise. Because actually, again, this segues really nicely onto it, because it's based on how well we are currently empowering leaders and managers to deliver recognition, whether it's linked to reward or not. So question 3 for you guys to log your thoughts on. How skilled are leaders and line managers in delivering positive feedback and creating a culture of recognition at your organisation currently? So very, somewhat, not very, or not at all. Denise, you had some thoughts on this brilliantly interesting topic of line manager training, manager empowerment.
Yeah, and
how does this work best, do you think?
I was really interested in the conversation you were having about empowering managers, and many of our customers take it even a step further, and they're empowering the employees. So they're giving a $5 or a $10 a month to employees to give to, Chatty, as you say, whoever they see are doing a great job. And so really empowering the employees themselves to own the recognition program and be owners of their own engagement is something that we're working with organizations on. So, it takes everyone, but the leaders are really important, because we've seen in our data that leaders who recognize their direct reports, those direct reports are 2.5 times more likely to recognize somebody else. So they're really the ambassadors of creating a culture of recognition. But what's been even more interesting is that it doesn't have to be tied to reward. We over 60% of all recognitions across our more than 2 million users are non-monetary in nature. And we love data, and we love looking at that data. And one study in particular is a customer of 200,000 employees who saw a direct impact from the number of recognitions an employee received to a 17-point increase in their engagement score. Wow. And that was all tied to non-monetary recognition.
There we go.
Very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where, like, our CEO, Denise, is just exceptional. She does see people and she thanks you, and it is genuine. And I think with her at the helm, then it can only be a success.
Do you think that is sort of the most decisive factor in all of this, having someone at the top who role models that, and then it
very
really
much
trickles
so.
down?
Very much so. People innately feel it and feel valued because of that. And again, she sets the example, and it filters down. So it's really, really powerful.
Do you need to train everyone more slightly formally around this though? Because I think that's a really interesting point you made around it's not just managers and leaders recognising each other. If you're creating a really genuine culture of recognition, everyone should be saying great job or thank you. And potentially when we've got flatter structures in terms of hierarchy at the moment anyway, you kind of need everyone to be sort of being the boss, being the manager in different situations. But do we need to, again, equip people with the training and tools to be able to do it really effectively and fairly?
The tools, potentially. I think training, it could become quite mechanical.
Yeah.
And I think that is the risk.
Yeah.
I must do this because it makes me a good manager, as opposed to...
Starts to feel a bit like indoctrination, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it comes back
you.
to the recruitment point, which is, very much, hiring the person and then upskilling and developing the necessary skill. Because I think if you get that right, who, like I say, someone like Denise, who innately feels, recognition is so vital, I think that's really important. But also you can reinforce through performance management, people who are, very visible and demonstrating the example. Absolutely, why not, recognise them through a performance management scheme. So.
Charlie, how do you feel on that?
There's two aspects to this. I feel it's maybe less about training, but about expectations, and something about when someone walks in the door. Actually setting out quite clearly that we expect you to recognise the achievements of others, but we will also recognise your achievements. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think culture, people talk about the role that leadership has in culture. I think it's co-created, and therefore, just kind of setting out, how you'd like people to behave day to day, is going to be really, really important for just people repeating those. Absolutely, keeping it fairly organic, and then you don't want to get in a cycle where you're giving people feedback on the feedback they're giving, but I mean, but you're recognising people who recognise, but absolutely, but and it might be alien to some, and they might have better skills, but if you can just create that environment where it's just expected, people expect, because we know how important it is, and as you've heard, a lot of these things are free.
Fantastic. Let's go to our results. So our final poll of the day. So we've got most people sitting in the middle camp. Probably not massively surprisingly, so somewhat, but actually a fair chunk, slightly worryingly, I guess. So 36% in the not very. So work to be done. Coming back to the training issue, maybe it is more appropriate to be sitting managers down, sitting leaders down, and saying, even with very senior people potentially, this is where I guess coaching comes in and HR's role in that comes in. Do we need to improve, or maybe we need different sorts of people in management positions? I don't know. Denise, what are your thoughts on that?
Many organizations will embed it in their onboarding or new manager or hire training. I think, Claire, your point that leading from the top makes all the difference, right? When the leaders live and breathe it, it's leading by example. But I do think that regular kind of discussion in onboarding and training can be really helpful as well. Not just once when you roll out a program, but on a regular basis.
Fantastic. One area I did want to cover before we go to our audience Q&A, which we must do in a minute because time is a Guinness. So how do you measure the success of all of this? And we've touched on this, I think, as we've gone, haven't we, to say, like, well, look at what fantastic engagement scores you could be achieving, but I guess this comes back to the slightly slippery question of how you measure and quantify a culture, doesn't it? How would you, Claire, how have you started to track, have our activities here been successful, and here is the data or slightly more anecdotal evidence to...
I think you touched on a really important point, which is, not slipping into complacency, and it's always trying to keep recognition fresh. What are the different ways? There's many plethoras, as you say, that you can recognise people. So we do use best companies and engagement scores because we do find that's a confidential way for people to articulate back to us whether they do feel recognised or not. And it has led to us developing some new ideas. So, I think it's really powerful. Plus, you do obviously have figures in terms of attrition and all that sort of thing. But I think fundamentally, and I think it's a feel as well. I think there's a feeling about when you walk into somewhere and you can see an energy, or You can feel that energy. So it can be quite hard to quantify, but I would certainly recommend the use of engagement surveys.
Yeah, so a few different metrics and then some, the kind of slightly more qualitative stuff being weaved in there. Chardy, what do you think was the best way of working out whether it's worked?
I think asking people. I think simply asking, do you feel recognised for the work that you're doing, the contribution you're making, your achievements? And I think the other thing is to ask them, how would you like to be recognised?
Yeah.
And then just having the very honest conversation about what the company can do. So, for example, if everyone says, actually, I want to be recognised through, material gift A, B, C, it's a conversation to say, actually, that we won't be able to do that, but this is what we can do. And I think that there's a nice theme coming through the questions, which is what organisations think their employees want and what employees want. So I think measurement is absolutely key, because if you can measure it, you can improve it. But I think the other one is about continuous improvement, and that's asking people, how do you want to be recognised? But I think some of the lasting principles are, I want to be recognised consistently, fairly. Yeah,
fantastic. Let's go to questions from our viewers before we run out of time, because hopefully there are some good ones coming in. So here we go. When it comes to employee, so peer recognition, how can HR mitigate the risk of it turning into a popularity contest? Brilliant question, taking us right back to that whole fairness issue. Claire, you're nodding knowingly as if this is something that you have to be very mindful of.
It's just a very fine balance, isn't it, between the empowerment and this making sure that you get the balance right. But I think if you do have a mechanism behind the scenes that's not visible, that's just giving a little bit of a sense check that the distribution is fair, it seems proportionate. I think that's one way that you can just have a bit of a catch-all, but appreciate when you've got employee to employee, you might not necessarily have that visibility. So it is a very difficult one, to be fair, but I think, again, it comes back to the behaviours and the culture that, and you do have to trust people. And, again, the skill of the line manager is that they should be absorbing, seeing it, and if there is a problem, then, it's for them to sort of act upon.
A good line manager should know, right, if there's a problem in their team. Yeah, Charlie, you're nodding.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. I think if you give a bit of guidance to managers, then they'll know how to do it. I don't expect a spa treatment every week for having a stellar week where I've worked hard. So it's just a bit of a guidance about saying, okay, well, this person or these people are consistent performers. So here are the different things you can do. Maybe you might want to give that person, some feedback in your one-to-ones, which you should be having regularly, and then every now and then. Because remember, if you are recognising someone systematically, mechanically, so it feels like a popularity contest.
They'll
come to expect
every
it.
Week.
Absolutely, yeah.
Creepy,
they'll come to expect it. So
you set a reminder.
Absolutely. So if that detaching the financial material award from just genuine recognition that happens organically and happens consistently, I think is really important.
Fantastic. Denise, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, we look at that regularly. So not just did people come into the platforms, employees come in once and log on, but who's coming back regularly. So we look at something called monthly active usage, and then we also look at coverage. So it's all well and good to stand up a recognition program, but if only 10% of the organization are using it or being impacted by it, that's not working. And so many customers come to us because they've spent an incredible amount of time, effort, and energy standing up a program, and when they look under the covers, it's actually not being used. So recommendation to the listeners, if you have a program and you can't see these things, I would say that's a red flag. Figure out how to find out, is it working? And make sure that it is built in and set up in a way that it can impact across the entire organization.
So it's not just certain people.
Slightly off tangent, but because we are so busy in the workplace, I think people just go straight down, work, and it's actually, how do we encourage people to take a breather, to pause, and to actually, look at their team and say, oh, do you know what, I've not even said good morning to you, or whatever, let alone a thank you for all the good work that you've done. So again, I think it's helping managers to, give themselves the permission to have that breathing space
It's
in
making
their
sure our
jobs.
workplaces remain nicely human, basically, isn't it? The human element of
That'd
never
be
mind
nice.
recognition. Yeah, like you say, are we talking to each other? Are we asking
Yeah.
each other how we are? I think that's completely right.
But I think there's this culture of, you know, people have to work hard all the time, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, you can have a breath, have a breather.
Have a coffee, go get some water, have a chat.
No,
And in
absolutely.
the pace of today, it's about making it
Yeah.
easy, right? If we can remove the
Agree, yeah,
barriers
definitely.
and make it super easy just
Yeah.
to say thank you,
Yeah.
or notice what somebody's done, that's going to be very valuable as well.
Fantastic. Let's go to another question so we can get a couple more in before we have to finish. So here we go. It is more difficult for smaller companies. What do you suggest we could introduce when we don't have many employees? I think that's an excellent question. So this person says we are only 12 people,
Yeah.
including 2 directors. So I think there's an opportunity and a challenge there, isn't
Yeah,
there?
absolutely.
Claire, you're...
No, I just think it is quite a difficult one to do, but I think it comes back to that recognition comes under several different banners. So for me, you know, there could be simple things like just, you know, going out to dinner, celebrating. You know, if there's only 12, is it very much you're having to work as a team, and therefore it becomes structured around doing something in celebration as a team. But it is quite difficult to do.
Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
on
so
that?
let's...
What are your top tips?
Well, I mean, it depends. These could be in 12 desperate countries across the world.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
that's how they could be sitting. I think it's about some of the common sense things, you know, and I think it's about talking to each other. But we know whether it's through technology, whether it's on a phone call, whether it's a group email, whatever it is, recognising someone's achievements is an action, and it's one that, if done consistently, creates a culture. So I think actually, if you've got a small environment, that's brilliant, because you haven't got the legacy of 50,000 people whose behaviour you're trying to change. You've not got that, so you know you can take more control, you know, and make sure that you know you're setting a precedent. I think ultimately those 2 directors, if they are saying the right things and doing the right things, because I think we alluded to earlier, it's about social learning. If people do what you do, and often they will do what their manager does. So if they can set, you know, role model it in the right way, set a precedent, and then do what's practical for them. That's the other thing. Don't worry about the swimming pool and the pool tables and the 3 dogs that are in the office. You know, what is practical for you? You know, what's in keeping with your, you know, with affordability in your strategy.
Yeah, really interesting point you mentioned. What if people are spread out? I wonder whether that's... I think it's really important, like you say, to make it organic, but I wonder whether that's where introducing some slightly formal mechanisms, like at the start of a meeting, we always go round and ask people how we are for the first 5 minutes, and no one's allowed. Stuff like that I've heard people talk about in terms of Skype meetings and phone meetings that really add, again, coming back to this, adding the human element back into work. Maybe you could have something like that for recognition, where it's like at the start of a meeting, you've got to go round and sort of, say what everyone's done well over the last, you know,
I think that's a
however
really
long.
good idea. But I think also, where you've got the 12 people, I think it's really, again, understanding the different personality types, because some people maybe find it a little bit difficult and a bit awkward.
We are British, after all.
But and actually, they may be recognising you in their own way.
Yeah.
So I think if you really know each other, you feel, okay, it might not be all singing or dancing.
That was
high five,
but compared to
exactly.
in their terms.
But in their way, they are thanking you. So I think where you've got 12 people, you have the beauty of really trying to get to know each other, so that you can pick up on those subtleties.
Again, it's an opportunity really where it's a small team. Denise, did you want to come in on this one?
I loved when you said earlier about bringing your whole self to work. So my advice would be to allow this small team to bring their whole selves to work, and as you say, get to know each other and understand, you know, what is recognition to them. It could be, you know, going home a couple of hours early because they have a family they have to get to, or it could be any number of things. But when you understand and offer choice, because everybody's different, that's important.
Fantastic. Let's squeeze one more question in. Very naughty because we're coming up to our time, but I think we'll just do one more. So what about the personality types who like to work under the radar and wouldn't like to be recognised publicly? So this goes back to what we were talking about a little while ago. How can you reward this type of work in the way that is appropriate for them? So you're actually delving into that question a little bit more in detail. Okay, so we recognise everyone likes to be recognised differently. What about those introverts or people who just, really cringe at someone saying they've done a good job. What do we do with those people, Claire? What would be your advice?
I think for me that it's, different options. Is it career development? Is it somebody who wants to be part of a different project and different opportunity? So I think, like I say, the word recognition is so widespread that I think there is always a way, regardless of the individual. But again, it comes back to knowing the individual and thinking of something that is really going to make them tick.
Fantastic.
So
Brilliant. I think we will have to leave it there because we are busting our 1:15 deadline. So as always, look out for coverage of the debates we've had today at hrmagazine.co.uk and in an upcoming issue of the magazine. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Achievers, our sponsor, and a huge thank you to everyone on our panel. Take care and see you all again soon for another HR lunchtime debate.